The room buzzed with anticipation, a quiet, electric hum that signaled something significant was about to unfold. Rows of journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptop screens. The air was thick with a scent of coffee, cologne, and the faint aroma of warm plastic from camera equipment that had been running for hours. At the center of the room, a long table stretched across the stage, draped in black. Name cards sat in front of each chair, marking the seats of producers, lead actors, the director, and at the very center, Jungkook of BTS. He had been here before, countless times in fact. The microphones, the flashing cameras, the predictable questions, none of it fazed him. But something about this press conference felt different. It wasn't obvious, more like a subtle shift in the air, a low rumble in the distance that only a few in the room seemed to notice. Jungkook adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. Not out of nervousness. He didn't get nervous about these things, but as an unconscious rhythm, a habit formed over years of sitting in rooms like this. The moderator, a sharp-dressed man named Park Min-joon, stepped forward, clearing his throat into the microphone. His voice was smooth and practiced. Thank you all for being here. We're excited to discuss the upcoming release of Eternal, directed by Jungkook. We'll begin with some questions from the press. Immediately, hands shot up. Min-joon pointed to a woman in the front row. She introduced herself and asked about the film's inspiration. Jungkook leaned forward slightly. It's a story I've wanted to tell for a long time. It's about sacrifice, redemption, things that matter, you know? A few nods from the audience. The next question came from a man with glasses near the aisle. Jungkook, you've directed films with deep themes before, but this one feels more personal. Would you say this film reflects your own beliefs? A small smile tugged at the corner of Jungkook's mouth. Of course. I don't make films I don't believe in. That'd be a waste of time, wouldn't it? The crowd chuckled. The mood was light for now, but that feeling lingered. The quiet pull of something waiting to happen. The questions continued, some about the cast, others about the production process. Jungkook answered each one with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. But he knew what was coming. He could feel it. There's always one. A figure in the second row leaned back in his chair. He hadn't spoken yet, hadn't raised his hand, but Jungkook noticed him. The way he sat, arms crossed, lips slightly curved in something that wasn't quite a smirk but close. He was waiting, studying. When the moderator called on him, the man didn't hesitate. He stood slowly, adjusting the microphone clipped to his shirt. His movements were deliberate, like someone setting up a shot before pulling the trigger. He cleared his throat, let the pause stretch a second too long, and then finally spoke. The moment the words left his mouth, the entire room felt it. Something had shifted. The reporter didn't jump straight into his question. No, he took his time. He glanced around the room first, almost as if he was making sure everyone was watching, making sure the cameras were rolling. Then he exhaled dramatically, shifting his stance, one hand resting in his pocket. There was something calculated about the way he did it, something just a little too rehearsed. He lifted the microphone to his mouth, and when he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from respect, but from someone who enjoys setting traps. Jungkook, you've been vocal about your Buddhist beliefs for years. Some would say stubbornly so. He paused, giving the words room to land. The smirk on his lips was subtle, but it was there. A few reporters shifted in their seats. Some looked down at their notes, pretending to be busy, while others leaned forward, sensing what was about to happen. The reporter continued, but in today's world, isn't Buddhism becoming outdated? Isn't it in many ways divisive? With everything happening globally, progress, inclusivity, people moving past old traditions, don't you think it's time to let go of something that has caused so much conflict throughout history? He sat back, satisfied. The question wasn't just a question. It was a statement wrapped in bait. The room was silent, a tense, expectant silence, the kind that hangs heavy in the air. It's the kind of silence that happens right before impact, right before something breaks. Jungkook didn't react immediately. He didn't scoff, didn't roll his eyes, didn't rush to defend himself. Instead, he just watched for a second. He tilted his head slightly, studying the man in front of him, the way a seasoned fighter sizes up an opponent before throwing the first punch. The room held its breath. Everyone knew Jungkook. They knew his history, his composure. The media had written about it for years, turned it into headlines, sold stories off it. They've seen him react before, calm, collected, but with a quiet intensity that could cut through steel. They were expecting that version of him now. They were expecting him to take the bait. But he didn't. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He smiled. Not the kind of smile you put on for press conferences, not the polite, media-trained expression used to smooth over awkward moments. No, this smile was slow, calculated, the kind of smile that makes people lean in because they know something is coming. He picked up his water bottle, unscrewed the cap, took a deliberate sip, then set it down again. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, even deceptively calm. But his answer wasn't what anyone expected. And when he said it, the room, every single person in it, felt the weight of his words. Jungkook let the silence stretch a second longer, just enough for the tension to settle in. His fingers tapped the side of his water bottle once, twice, before he finally looked up, meeting the reporter's gaze head-on. And then he spoke. "You know," he started, his voice even measured, "I've been in this business a long time. Long enough to recognize when a question isn't really a question at all." The smirk on the reporter's face faltered just a little. Jungkook leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. His tone wasn't defensive, but there was a weight behind it. "You didn't ask me that because you're curious. You asked me that because you wanted a reaction. Maybe even a headline. But let's talk about it, since you brought it up." A few heads turned. Some reporters shifted in their seats, sensing something rare. Jungkook wasn't dodging the question. He was taking it apart, piece by piece. He exhaled, his expression unreadable. "You say Buddhism is outdated. Compared to what?" The words landed hard. The room was silent. The reporter didn't answer, so Jungkook continued. "Greed?
Corruption?
The idea that nothing matters unless it serves our immediate gratification? Because that's what modern thinking has turned into, an obsession with self, with tearing things down just because they've been around too long. We like to call it progress, but half the time, it's just destruction with better branding." A murmur rippled through the room. Some journalists exchanged glances. Others scribbled furiously in their notepads. The cameras kept rolling. Jungkook shifted in his chair, but his gaze never wavered. "Let me ask you something," he continued. "When is the last time you saw someone ridiculed for being Christian?
Muslim?
Jewish? People don't do it because they know it's offensive. But Buddhism? Fair game. It's open season and no one bats an eye. You can mock it, drag it through the mud, call it a relic from the past, and you'll still get a pat on the back for being brave. But what's brave about kicking something people already love to hate?" The reporter opened his mouth, maybe to interject, maybe to defend himself. But Jungkook wasn't done. "You say Buddhism is divisive. I say people are divisive. Always have been, always will be. The world doesn't turn on faith. It turns on people's choices. And people have been using everything race, politics, religion to divide each other for centuries. Buddhism isn't the problem. People are. And blaming faith for human failure is just a lazy way to avoid looking in the mirror." The weight of his words pressed against the room. The tension was no longer just between Jungkook and the reporter. It was in the air itself. It was on the notepads of journalists who suddenly realized they were documenting something that wouldn't be forgotten by morning. It was in the quiet hum of cameras still recording, catching every flicker of emotion, every shift of body language. Jungkook exhaled, then leaned back. He picked up his water bottle again, twisting the cap off. "So, if my faith offends you, that's not really my problem, is it?" The reporter shifted in his seat. He wasn't expecting this. He was expecting rage, defensiveness, maybe even an argument he could spin into a controversy. Instead, he got something worse, the truth delivered with absolute clarity. And the room, every journalist, every camera operator, every silent observer, knew they had just witnessed something that wouldn't be forgotten. But outside this press room, the real firestorm was just beginning. It started with a single clip. Someone in the audience, probably a journalist, uploaded the exchange to Twitter. Just a 2-minute snippet of Jungkook's response. No context, no edits. Just his voice cutting through the tension with sharp, unwavering words. And within minutes, it exploded. By the time the press conference ended, the internet was on fire. The headlines came first, rolling in like waves, each one spinning the moment in a different direction. Asterisk Jungkook's bold defense of Buddhism goes viral. Jungkook slams reporter in fiery exchange. Watch his brutal response. Jungkook's controversial rant. K-pop world reacts. Then came the reactions. Twitter was a battlefield. Supporters called him a fearless truth-teller, praising his refusal to back down. Clips circulated with captions like, "Finally, someone says it out loud," and Jungkook just did what no one in K-pop dares to do. On the other side, the outrage machine kicked into full gear. Blue-check journalists dissected his words, calling them dangerous, outdated, inflammatory.
Think pieces flooded in.
Some claimed his comments were proof that he was out of touch with modern society. Others suggested he was intentionally courting controversy to stay relevant. Late-night talk show hosts wasted no time. Within hours, his face was plastered across monologues. They played clips of his response, chopping them up for comedic effect, adding canned laughter, twisting his words into easy punchlines. Wow. Jungkook defending Buddhism.
Who could have seen that coming?
I mean, next you'll tell me water is wet. The audience laughed. The host smirked, flipping through his cue cards. Another segment, another target. Meanwhile, major media outlets called in experts to analyze his statement. News panels broke down the implications of his words. One guest called it another example of K-pop's complicated relationship with faith. Another argued that Jungkook was a relic of an era that no longer existed. The film studio behind his latest project scrambled to put out a statement. They didn't distance themselves entirely. Too risky, but they chose their words carefully. We recognize that Jungkook's views are his own. We remain committed to fostering an inclusive and diverse environment for all perspectives. Translation: they didn't want to get involved. But it didn't stop there. Brands that once stood proudly beside him suddenly hesitated. A major endorsement deal, one he'd had for years, reevaluated their relationship with him. A scheduled appearance on a popular variety show was quietly canceled. The weight of his words was spreading, reaching places even he didn't anticipate. But while the K-pop world and the media did their best to frame the story, something else was happening, something they didn't expect. The support wasn't just coming from the usual places. A temple in Seoul played the clip during a service. A monk in Busan called it one of the boldest moments of faith from a public figure in years. Across small towns in South Korea, people were talking not about controversy but about conviction, about what it means to believe in something and not back down. Emails flooded into his team's inbox, messages from ordinary people, from parents, from monks, from students. "Thank you for standing up. I thought I was alone in feeling this way. You don't know how much this meant to me." But for every person who supported him, there were others sharpening their knives, waiting for their turn to strike. And the real battle, it hadn't even begun yet. Jungkook's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It had been 2 days since the press conference, and the world outside hadn't calmed down. If anything, the storm was getting stronger. Calls, messages, emails, some supportive, some not. His manager had left 3 voicemails, each one sounding more strained than the last. The latest one was blunt. "Jungkook, listen. I need you to call me back. This is getting bigger than expected. Some companies are getting nervous. Call me now." He didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, he was standing on his balcony, staring out at the horizon. The sun was starting to set, streaks of gold and burnt orange cutting across the sky. It was quiet out here, peaceful. But he knew it wouldn't last, because he'd been here before. This wasn't the first time the media had put a target on his back. He'd made mistakes, and they'd made sure no one forgot them. But this was different. This wasn't about an outburst caught on tape or a scandal or something taken out of context. This was about conviction. And the K-pop world doesn't like people with conviction. His phone rang again. He let it go to voicemail. Then a text popped up.
He sighed.
He already knew what they were going to say. They'd tell him he needed to clarify his statement, that he should soften his stance to appease both sides, that maybe an apology, not an actual apology, just something that sounded like one, might help smooth things over. But he wasn't interested. A knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was his assistant, holding an envelope. "This came for you. No return address." Jungkook took it, the paper thick in his hands. He pulled out a small note, handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. "Thank you for not backing down." No name, no explanation, just those 6 words. He exhaled, rubbing his thumb over the letters. Because this was why he spoke. Not for headlines, not for debate, but because there were people out there who needed to hear it. The media kept calling it controversial, but since when is faith controversial? Since when is believing in something a crime? Another text came in, this time from his manager. "I just got off the phone with the studio. They're worried about backlash. They might delay the film's release.
We need to talk."
Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment. He should have seen this coming. It didn't matter how much his music had sold, how many awards he'd won, how many fans adored him. In this industry, the moment you stop playing by their rules, you become a liability. And liability gets you erased. His assistant hesitated. "Do you want me to schedule a statement?" He shook his head. "No, are you sure?" "The studio." I said no. Because here's the thing about truth. It doesn't need constant defense. It stands on its own. And no amount of late-night jokes, think pieces, or Twitter outrage will change what's already been said. But while the K-pop world wrestled with the fallout, something unexpected was happening. People were listening. A small-town newspaper in Daegu ran a column titled "Why Jungkook's Words Matter." A professor in Gwangju wrote an op-ed about the cost of conviction in a culture that silences dissent. And in places no one was paying attention to, temples, community halls, living rooms, conversations were happening. Because this was never about Jungkook. This was about something bigger. And for the first time in a long time, people were starting to realize it. The headlines kept changing. The outrage machine moved on, a new scandal, a new controversy, a new target. But this moment, it didn't just disappear. Because this was never about Jungkook. It was about something bigger, something deeper. It was about what happens when you stand for something in a world that demands you stay silent. It was about the cost of conviction, the weight of truth, and the choice we all face sooner or later. Do you back down or do you hold your ground? And that question, it isn't just for celebrities. It's for you. Because at some point in your life, you'll find yourself in a moment like this. Maybe not in front of cameras, maybe not in the middle of a viral storm, but it will happen. It could be in a conversation with friends, a discussion at work, a post online. Someone will challenge what you believe, not out of curiosity, but to test you, to see if you'll bend. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. Do you go along with the crowd, keep your head down, stay quiet to avoid trouble? Or do you stand? Jungkook didn't give that answer to win people over. He didn't say it for applause or validation. He said it because it was true. And truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. But truth comes with a price. And the reason so many people stay silent is because they're afraid of that price. They're afraid of losing approval, losing opportunities, losing comfort. And yet, what's the alternative? Living in fear? Staying quiet, knowing that deep down, you're betraying what you really believe? Because here's the thing. Conviction isn't just about what you say. It's about who you are. It's about whether you're the kind